Hello subscribers and other viewers. As many of you probably know, I'm a big fan of the Metal Gear Solid series of video games, and as many of you also probably know, there is a video game critic by the name of Anita Sarkeesian who has been making a lot of controversial comments regarding a ton of different video games over the past year or so. This has garnered wide criticism and condemnation from the gaming community, but she has continued going strong and has many supporters. Now, I had been planning on staying out of this controversy. It just wasn't something I really wanted to touch. But given that she does criticism of media, I am probably best known for my criticism of Fox News and other media outlets for their reporting on video games. It was probably inevitable at some point that I would end up making a video like this. And what motivated me to today was that I found online a certain article and a quote that I found on Tumblr where she specifically calls out Metal Gear Solid in a way that is hugely problematic. Now, I'm not going to get into all of her general views. This video is going to be very limited to her comments on Metal Gear Solid. So, let's get started. The subject of Anita Sarkeesian's criticism was a post on Hideo Kojima, the creator of Metal Gear Solid's Twitter page, referring to a certain doll that was being made of a character in the game. So let's start off with a quote. Quote, "The production of a doll like this, where the players are encouraged to physically molest an already hypersexualized female game character's breasts, is gross, but should not be at all surprising, at least not to anyone who's been paying attention to the Metal Gear Solid series. This doll is completely consistent with Kojima's ongoing pattern of sexually objectifying the majority of his female characters. For just one of many examples, in Metal Gear Solid 4, during Snake's therapy sessions, the developers built in a mechanic where the player is encouraged to shake the 6-axis PlayStation controller to jiggle the breasts of the protagonist's PTSD counselor." And you can also see an image and description of the doll. So a lot of you right now who are familiar with Metal Gear Solid are probably deeply confused, as you should be. A ton of that statement is just completely wrong and misinformed. So even if it's been a while since you've played Metal Gear Solid 4, don't freak out, your memory has not totally failed you. Now, I have a tendency to like to give people a general impression of something before I get into details. So let's talk about how women in Metal Gear Solid are generally portrayed before I take about the statement piece by piece. Now, as a fan of the series, I would say that it's probably known for having very strong female protagonists. Probably some of the strongest in gaming. For example, in the first game, the only reason Snake can even succeed is because a woman named Meryl, for those of you who are familiar with the series, infiltrated the base before you and acquired necessary information and an access card that Snake did not acquire and would not have been able to acquire on his own, thus placing her in a very important role. Meryl also comes back in Metal Gear Solid 4 and is not only the leader of a squadron, but is clearly capable of handling herself very well. Moving on to Metal Gear Solid 3, it is revealed that probably the best warrior in the entire series is a woman. Her codename is the Boss, and she was responsible for training literally all of the elite agents in the game, including your character. I'm not going to get into plot details, but I'm going to refer to the main character you play as in that game as Big Boss. I know he doesn't technically become Big Boss until the end, but for people who don't know the series who might be watching the video, I want to simplify it. And the Boss was even responsible for inventing her own fighting style, which became the standard quickly for all Special Forces agents in the Metal Gear Solid universe. Ultimately, the Boss makes a sacrifice that saves the entire world, basically, avoiding nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the United States. And it's revealed that Big Boss, the male protagonist, is actually only a pawn in the whole story, who ended up having very little power over what happened. The Boss also repeatedly physically dominates and frankly just beats the crap out of Snake, out of Big Boss, that is. Including, she was able to break his arm, break his ribs, overpower him and throw him to the ground, throw him off of a freaking bridge. This almost killed him, obviously. And frankly, she allowed him to live when she could have killed him 3 times. The first one being at the bridge, the second one being when she encountered Big Boss in the woods, and the third time being the torture scene, for those of you who are familiar with the game. Over the course of this, she also disarmed him twice, at the bridge and in the woods. Although you do defeat her in the end, Big Boss does defeat the boss. It's very heavily implied that she actually allows you to win, as part of her heroic self-sacrifice. Alright, now I'm going to start to get into spoilers. Major spoilers. The cutscene at the end of the game, it's revealed that she was actually the true hero, and she gave up everything, including her reputation for untold generations to come, by taking a fall for a terrible mistake the US government made. And she did it all to save the world from nuclear war and the country she loved. Making her the hero, and your character an unwitting pawn in a scheme. She's the true hero of the game. Given that her sacrifice and her death was necessary to be a scapegoat, I think it's very heavily implied that she allows you to win at the end of the game. The United States government essentially, in the plot, needs to kill her because they're acting as though she is an agent who has defected. And they do this to cover their own asses because an American-made nuclear bomb blew up in Russia. They claim that it was her fault because she defected. In reality, she was undercover. But to make it up to the Russians to avoid war, the President of the United States agrees to kill the boss for them, and that's why you are sent in to do the job. In addition, at the end of the game, there is another woman who turns out to be a spy and then outsmarts Big Boss. If anything, in Metal Gear Solid 3 at least, there's a pattern of Big Boss being defeated by women. For more information on just how significant her sacrifice was, although it contains major spoilers, I'm going to attach a link to the ending cutscene of Metal Gear Solid 3 in the description of the video. Watch it at your own risk of spoilers, but if you've already played the game, it's also a good reminder of just how much of a hero the boss was. Now that I've made it clear that I think the Metal Gear Solid series has a fairly positive depiction of women on average, let's deal with this particular case. It is incredibly obvious that she has never played the game, and in fact, she hasn't researched it well, at all. Not even enough to understand the basics of the scene she describes. First off, Snake is never in therapy, let alone for PTSD. During this meeting, he is getting information on a biological weapon and virus called Foxdie that he has been infected with. Okay, no kind of therapy comes up. PTSD is never mentioned. This is not even vaguely correct. Not to mention, Naomi, who is the name of the woman in question, although that name is not mentioned by Anita Sarkeesian, so I question whether she even knows the character's name, is not a psychologist or psychiatrist. She does not do therapy, let alone for PTSD. Now, how on earth could Anita Sarkeesian have known that? Oh wait, it's on the Wikipedia page that is literally the first result on Google when you Google Naomi Hunter, the name of this character. But I guess to Google that name, you would have to know the name, wouldn't you? Keep in mind, Anita Sarkeesian has made tens of thousands, and maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars now. And she says that she needs this money to research the games that she's talking about. She literally could not be bothered to do a Google search or find out the character's name. That's a whole separate issue, but she is very often criticized for not actually playing the games, and very often criticized for taking all that money. Also, there is only a few scenes where Solid Snake and Naomi interact, not multiple therapy sessions. This isn't even vaguely something that happens in the game. Not to mention, I will criticize her word choice here. The players are never encouraged to use the 6-axis. In fact, the players are never even informed that the 6-axis does this. It is true that you can shake the 6-axis and get this result, which is You know, if people want to criticize that, that's one thing. But please be accurate about it, at least the basics. And keep in mind, the players are never informed of this option. It's what they call in video games an Easter egg. An Easter egg is something that a character or a player can discover, but they're normally put in as kind of a joke. Again, if you want to criticize this particular Easter egg, that's a different conversation. But it's not something that players are encouraged to do. Players are not even informed of it. I would also like to point out that, to defend Kojima, it's entirely possible that Kojima was never even informed that that was in the game, and that it was just added by some developer who thought it was funny. Because after all, it's not easy to find. It can also only be done in codec calls, which is not how Anita Sarkeesian described it. Keep in mind, this article was published in Forbes. Journalistic integrity, anyone? Did nobody feel like checking out to see if this was even vaguely accurate? Did no one feel like Googling? Did no one feel like anything? You know, I know it's an opinion article and all, but you should probably at least do basic fact-checking on your opinion articles for basic facts. Now, as for the doll itself, I'll admit I think it's a little creepy. However, it is made by a third party, so I don't know how you blame Kojima, who is an individual, for that. He's not the one making it. He didn't even necessarily okay the creation of them. Perhaps Konami approved it, and the use of the name and the character, but I think it's unlikely that Kojima was even consulted about it. Kojima has also had a major falling out with Konami very publicly over the past few months, primarily regarding the amount of freedom that he does or does not have, and this led to the cancellation of a huge game that Kojima had been working on. I think it's very likely that Kojima will leave Konami in the next few months, but that is yet to be seen. To summarize, this is terrible. This is inaccurate in nearly every way. The only two things that Anita Sarkeesian gets right is that you can, in fact, do this with the 6-axis controller, and the doll exists. Although I don't know if it exists in exactly the way she's interpreting. As for whether Kojima had anything to do with that, we don't know. Again, if people want to criticize that, that's a bit different, but at least get the basic facts right, and do not throw the entire series, which I think has a good track record overall with women and how they're portrayed, showing diverse representations who are extremely strong, either emotionally, physically, strong across the board, who are leaders, including military leaders. You know, don't throw the whole series under the bus when you have no idea what it is, and get your basic facts right. So I don't plan to make any future videos on this type of topic, but when I saw this, and being a big fan of Metal Gear, and given that I frequently have done commentaries in the past on how video games are portrayed and talked about in the media, I felt obligated to do this one. But anyway, I hope you all watched the video. I'm sure it will lead to discussion. And this is my contribution to this topic. I know it's a complex topic. I know there's a lot of stuff I didn't talk about with Anita Sarkeesian. That was intentional. I'm not trying to get into this, but I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.